Fate is a tenacious creature. It binds us to shackles that some cannot escape from, while others fight so desperately against it. The developers at Intelligent Systems aligned with the latter. After many years of failures, second guesses, and controversial moments, their fate had seemed to be sealed, with their beloved franchise fading away from history. But they couldn't accept this. Fire Emblem would go out with a bang, not a whimper. Through hard work, determination, and countless hours working long into the night, their efforts culminated in Fire Emblem Awakening, a game that put the collective efforts of everyone who had worked at the company for the past 2 decades into one small package. To them, they were content with their creation. Whether it failed or succeeded didn't matter to them. They had done their best in every regard. Yet suddenly, everything changed. Nearly 2 million people bought their last iteration, and boundless praise was heaped onto them for their endeavors. A surprise that nobody had anticipated. So, everyone involved now just had one question on their mind. What's next? After Fire Emblem Awakening's unprecedented victory, Intelligent Systems was shocked to find out that Nintendo wanted a sequel. They had thought that Awakening was to be the final game in the series, with or without commercial success. But Nintendo didn't want just any ordinary sequel. Oh no, they wanted it to succeed its predecessor in every shape and form. Quickly, Intelligent Systems came forward with a proposal that fits those specifications. Given the obvious code name of Fire Emblem 3DS2, the story they pitched was a winding narrative that stemmed from one pivotal choice that branched out into 3 different stories. In this tale, there were 2 kingdoms, one of light and one of darkness. The player would play as a prince or princess of that darkness who had been kidnapped by the wicked king of the dark at a tender young age. After learning of their fate, the player was given 3 choices: side with the light, side with the dark, or walk a different path than either. The choice would be their own. There were many reasons why Intelligent Systems chose this type of story, but the main reason behind it all was they wished to rectify the mistakes they had made in Awakening. Fans had criticized them less for the gameplay and graphics and more for the story in comparison to the past Fire Emblem titles. And they earnestly wanted to improve on that front. They not only wanted to create a narrative that appealed to newcomers, but one that veterans would come to like. And their hook would be that fateful decision the player would make. They wanted to weave a tale that would have players singing both sides of a conflict and allow them to understand both of the warring forces' ideologies and where exactly they're coming from. But to do this would require a massive amount of effort on Intelligent Systems' behalf. While the majority of the Fire Emblem Awakening team was coming back for this next project, their old workforce just wasn't enough. The amount of writing, characters, and world building needed would require 3 times the manpower than they had on hand. Kohei Maeda and his team just weren't enough. The most important area they needed help in was the writing department. After shuffling through nearly all of the video game writers they knew, they found the right man for the job. Shin Kibayashi, a prolific manga and anime writer. Yusuke Kazaki had known him through their shared editor and soon introduced him to the project. At first, he refused due to his tight schedule, but soon after playing Fire Emblem Awakening with his daughter, he excitedly agreed. Submitting an initial 10-page outline for each storyline, he quickly grew fond of the characters and ended up writing a 1,500-page outline for the whole game, driven by a need to create a high-quality story and partially to surpass his daughter's pressuring expectations. His writing ended up creating enough script to fill 2 complete books worth of material. Combing through the aftermath of his work would be Nami Kamuro, a writer who had previously worked on Fire Emblem Awakening, and Yukinori Kitajima, a writer for the Senran Kagura series. Him and his scriptwriting company, Synthes, would come together to write the 3rd neutral path and the many support conversations for this next entry, a choice that had dire consequences down the line. But what of the sound and art department, you might ask? For such a task, many talented team members would need to be on hand to make it a reality. The lead character designer, in particular, was a tough one to wrangle in. The dynamic duo of Toshiyuki Kusakihara and character designer Yusuke Kozaki had truly designed the look of the Fire Emblem franchise. Every entry had different character designers and art directors, and all looked different from each other with a small pinch of that trademark Fire Emblem style that unified them as a whole, but they lacked the uniformity that these two had implemented in Awakening, and the team wanted both of them back, especially Kozaki. The sheer amount of characters they would be asking for him to design made them wary as to whether he would be coming back or not. But they didn't need to worry. He was just ecstatic to get the chance to work on yet another Fire Emblem title. Designing such an exorbitant amount of characters would certainly prove to be a challenge. However, the sound department had even more work to contend with. Not only would they have to compose as much music as they had for Fire Emblem Awakening, but they would have to do it 3 times in a row and maintain the same level of quality throughout. Hiroki Morishita and Rei Kondo, the previous composers, wouldn't be enough. 3 others would have to be called in. Takeru Kanazaki, Yasuhisa Baba, and Masato Koda would all have to come together to create the next Fire Emblem masterpiece. Their centerpiece to this would be the game's main theme. Opposed to the traditional Fire Emblem theme, their new project would separate itself from the norm. Lost in Thoughts, All Alone, would be their creation. Written by Morishita, with lyrics by Kohei Maeda, and sung by popular Japanese pop singer Renka, the role of the singer was a crucial one both for the story and the song itself. The developers were looking for a singer who could do justice to their vision for the character, and when they heard Renka's audition, they instantly decided that she was right for the role, with several of them being brought to tears by her performance. Tears of a kind were common among the developers at Intelligent Systems, as many of the seeds that they had sowed in Awakening and several of the choices they had made along the way had begun to chip away at the mindsets of many of their developers. It all began with the simple act of splitting duties among different teams. The core development staff worked on the game's shared assets, while additional teams handled the level design. This split the team apart, but they were still working as one cohesive unit. However, as time went on, things began to change. Many of the developers ended up in 2 different groups, Team A and Team B. Team A and Team B formed because of their conflicting opinions. Team A wanted to return to a simpler time, when fan service wasn't at the forefront of the series, and they were solely on crafting better stories, characters, and gameplay. Team B, on the other hand, wanted to push the boundaries far beyond Fire Emblem Awakening, and increase said fan service tenfold to incredibly lewd degrees. Their argument was that some of their precious resources that needed to be focused on actual development of the game should instead be focused on more intimate aspects of the experience. They didn't advance the plot, they didn't make the characters more memorable, they weren't essential to the gameplay, but they did help bring in many players before. So, having more of that should be a good thing. One group saw success in a tactful approach, while another took a pandering route. These 2 opposing forces would fight back against each other for the entire development process, pushing back and forth on what the project came to be. Thankfully, the majority of the elements that made up the experience were left unaffected. The most critical concept they had to get right, of course, was you, the player, or rather, your player character. My unit, as it was so affectionately called, had become a crucial part of the experience since New Mystery of the Emblem, and Intelligent Systems had taken note. Players were always a side character, crucial to the plot, yes, but not the main character of the story per se. They sought to make the story surround your avatar and make him or her the main focus. There were no ifs, ands, or buts. You would be the main character of the story, and of course, along with this, you could customize them to your liking, making them look as wacky or serious as you wanted them to be. There was also a new feature added to further help customize this aspect of the game, titled My Castle. It was similar to the barracks that had existed in previous Fire Emblem titles, although it was very much more of a home base that players could change and rework to their own liking. There were, of course, the Fire Emblem staples, such as the weapon shops where you could rearm yourself, along with the arena, that let you fight and bet on resources. These resources became an important part of My Castle as well, as if you grew some food, you could use it in a dish to beef up your army for the next battle, or forge even better weapons with some gemstones. On the lighter side of things, the hot springs allowed the player to have various interactions with the cast, and you also had your own private quarters, which served as a way to invite characters over to improve your support rank with them, and partake in the controversial skinship feature. It was really odd. But your castle wasn't only used for buying weapons, eating food, and rubbing people's faces. There was still the much-lauded Street Pass feature to contend with. Wi-Fi battles had existed in the series ever since New Mystery of the Emblem, but with My Castle, things became more personal. You weren't just fighting on some ordinary map, but now on your own turf. Your own customized, deadly turf. You see, your castle wasn't just for looks. Various traps and items were all there to help your cause. Ballistas, caltrops, healing dragons, living golems, and the oh-so-classic fort were just some of the many ways you could try to stop the enemy along with your selected units, of course. All of this could be played in person. However, it was also possible to leave your fort open to the public, allowing anyone to come in and trade while trying to best your favorite warriors. These Wi-Fi battles offered endless replayability, even when you finished the story. With all of this, it seemed like things were getting interesting with Fire Emblem's second shot on the 3DS, but the dividing factor between fans of old was still to come. The Weapon Triangle, the single greatest addition to all of Fire Emblem, was the first to see such a change. It was still a triangle, but no longer did swords, axes, and lances define it. Bows, magic, and the newly reclassed shuriken took center stage. All 6 weapon types had 2 weapons they were superior to, 2 they're weak to, and 1 that doesn't affect them in the slightest. So of course, this irrevocably affected the gameplay, forcing many to change tactics that would previously have worked. But that wasn't all. Personal skills made a comeback. Units had only one fixed reclassing option unless they used the new friendship and partner seals. Nearly all weapons have bonuses and penalties for using them now. All classes were unisex, save a few, and there were new weapons and classes to go with this, such as wolves and katanas, with the biggest change of them all involving the weapons themselves, which were now completely unbreakable. The support system was, as always, an important part of the adventure, with many of the ideas introduced in Awakening translating to the new 3DS title. Like Awakening, 2 characters can build support points and support each other. Unlike Awakening, there were also A+ rank supports that were between 2 best friends instead of 2 lovers. You can also once again have children when you reach S rank between 2 units. Although, unlike Awakening where they impacted the story in a major way, this time they seemed to have no effect, and were less of a crucial gameplay element and more of an afterthought. But the pair-up mechanic that had become a crucial part of the series wasn't like that. Yes, it still acted the same way as before, but now the enemy had the ability to wield it too, making it less of a detriment and more like another tool in your toolbox. Out of all of these, casual mode of course made its return. However, the developers felt something was missing from this optional edition. Due to casual mode, nearly everyone who played Fire Emblem Awakening had the ability to beat it. This seemed fine and dandy until they realized that some people still were unable to complete their adventure. This is where Phoenix mode came into play. When using this, now whenever a unit fell in battle, they wouldn't just be out until the next chapter, they'd revive in the next turn, almost completely getting rid of any negatives to dying. Now with this newcomer mode, nearly 100% of the people who would play through this game would beat it. But at what cost would this pandering have on the Fire Emblem veterans who have been around for years? As with many things, only time would tell. With all of these features and interactions and past innovations, there was still something missing, something crucial: a name. Looking back to the project's initial concept, it's easy to find it. Their story was all about ifs. What if you decided to side with the Kingdom of Light? What if you sided with the Kingdom of Darkness? What if you rejected both? Fire Emblem If was the answer. Releasing initially in 2015 and later in 2016 worldwide as the retitled and appropriately named Fire Emblem Fates, the release of this title was most intriguing. It wasn't released as just one game, but it was released as 3 separate journeys for you to take. At its core, Fate starts out in a land stricken with war between 2 sides, Hoshido and Nor. These 2 warring nations were very different from one another. Hoshido, a land not too dissimilar from ancient Japan, was a peace-loving and prosperous country that was only protecting themselves from the conniving hands of Nor, a nation torn right from the pages of classic Fire Emblem medieval fare. They seek not peace, but war, and wish to conquer Hoshido and its neighboring countries. Caught in the middle is you, the Avatar, otherwise known as Corrin. As a prince of Nor, Corrin has been locked away in a remote castle for nearly all his life, wishing to only see the outside world. He is eventually given the chance to do so when his father, King Garon, sends him to an outpost near the neighboring Hoshido. But before he knows it, he's been betrayed by a fellow Norian and caught by Hoshidan forces. But he isn't killed immediately for some reason. That reason is that Corrin is actually a prince of Hoshido, kidnapped and raised by Garon Faerun to fight against his family. After a fateful meeting with Azura, a princess who shared the same fate, and learning of his dragon heritage, Corrin is thrown onto the battlefield and forced to choose. Will he stay with the family that is bound to him by blood, or with the one that raised him and made him who he is? The choice is yours. Now is when the game begins to split into three paths: Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation. Each of their stories is not only unique, but have their own classes, weapons, and unique gameplay style to them. Fire Emblem Birthright is the easiest of the bunch, following Corrin and his army as they seek to rid Nor of their king. Since Hoshido is based off Japan, the weaponry and classes had to reflect this. Bows became Yumi and swords became katanas, with new classes such as diviners and Oni savages taking the places of mages and warriors. The game itself was also significantly easier too. With the ability to level up characters outside of the storyline, the only objective generally was to rout the enemy and take over their castle. This was Fire Emblem for beginners, and was the recommended starting point between these three titles. While each of the three titles were their standalone adventures, little hints and tidbits spread throughout all three were crucial to understanding the overall story. But many skipped this version after seeing how much it strayed from the standard Fire Emblem formula. Instead, they preferred to go with the next version, Conquest. This version was more at home for the Fire Emblem faithful, with classic weapons and classes at their side. Instead of siding with his true family, Corrin chooses the family that raised him and seeks to expel the darkness hidden within his country. This wouldn't be your standard kill everyone in sight journey, however, as each mission in Conquest is structured differently. New and unique victory conditions became a part of the everyday experience. Now you could be forced to defend a base from an enemy attack, break through the ranks of your opponents to escape, or even have certain turn restrictions depending on the map. On top of this, you had to worry about where and when you killed your opponents, and who their experience was being sent to. This time around, you couldn't just grind to success like in Birthright. You had to carefully plan out your moves and units on and off the battlefield. It was the true Fire Emblem experience that any fan could ask for, and while certain aspects of the game still bothered some, Conquest more than made up for that. But between the simplicity of Birthright and the difficulty of Conquest lied Revelation, the midpoint of the two. Revelations took the best of both worlds and molded them into one. Corrin, in this version, decides to choose neither side and instead opts to find a peaceful resolution between the warring states and learn about the inner workings of the world. To do this, he follows Azura into the secret kingdom of Vala, a land hidden beneath the world, to discover both their paths and save the world from utter destruction at the hands of yet another dark dragon. The story was all about bringing the world together, so of course every single unit from every other version is playable, allowing for even more possible combinations and pairings. Even though Revelations does increase the difficulty like Conquest, many of Birthright's ideas, such as unlimited experience and the only objectives usually being to rout the enemy, remain the same. However, something seemed to be missing from this crucial quest: the heart and soul that beat in the quest for newcomers, Fire Emblem Birthright, and the quest for veterans, Fire Emblem Conquest, seemed to be missing from this final storyline. It just felt out of place compared to the other adventures, and while it proved a good midpoint for the three, the overall experience was sort of lackluster in its conclusion. Fire Emblem Fates had faced development hell up until this point, but somehow it succeeded in many ways, offering many stellar additions to the franchise and two equally compelling storylines. Walking away with just one uninspired narrative and a few odd mechanics was nothing to snuff at. But they weren't out of the fire just yet, as their international release was plagued by controversy. Several features and additions had to be removed entirely to make way for the Fire Emblem Fates release in other countries. Skinship was stripped down and removed many of its lewd and perverse elements, and a support conversation that resembled to some gay conversion therapy was changed outright. These localization issues and more made many feel that they should boycott the game in protest of these changes. But, as with most of these protests, nothing ever came of it. Instead, it was released as it was, localization problems and censorship included. Fire Emblem Fates was another smash hit for the series, selling a whopping 1.84 million copies worldwide during its run, showing just how much of a fanbase the series had now. It was a benchmark title for the series in many ways, and showed just how valuable the franchise had become to the world. The days of being an obscure obscure and niche set of video games were finally over. A franchise that proved time and time again that it could hold its own with the rest of Nintendo's icons, Fire Emblem was now one of the greats. This respect, in turn, led to the franchise being declared as a major IP by Nintendo, a move that was unexpected but appreciated nonetheless. Fire Emblem had become one of the greatest success stories of the generation, from its humble beginnings as the first major tactical RPG to its many successful years with its creator. The franchise struggled to find its footing for nearly a decade. A plethora of stellar titles came out during the intervening years, yet the public never took notice as the series slowly began to fade away. Only when they were given an ultimatum and forced to work the hardest they had in their lives did they truly find success. And now they knew that success wasn't a mistake. Fire Emblem wasn't planning on going away anytime soon.